Okay, Mark, we went ahead and Melissa went ahead and started that. Just give us the green light when to give the go ahead to the chair.
Okay, I need to start a YouTube channel, okay?
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order for the regular meeting for the Planning Commission today, October 13, 2021. Time is 7:03.
Ms. Chair, we are still starting the YouTube channel. Please give me a minute.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Chair, we are live.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is the regular meeting for the Baldwin Park Planning Commission for October 13, 2021. Time is 7:04 p.m. Commissioner Vasquez, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yep. Chan, begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, Republic, and one nation, God, indivisible, justice for all.
Now, Planning Secretary, will you please do roll call?
Commissioner Peña,
Present.
Commissioner Vasquez,
Here.
Commissioner Escobosa,
Here.
Vice Chair Maciel Jr.,
Here.
Commissioner Valenzuela.
Here. Now I'd like to call for oral communications. Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the opportunity to make public communications. I did want to let everyone know and the commissioners know that we have received two written correspondence that has been provided to the commission and will be made part of the record. But for any public communication, that's required to be made here in the chambers, and whoever wishes to come down and give public communication may do so. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, is there anybody else who would like to speak? Any more public communications? I see none. So now I close public communications. Thank you. Now we'll go ahead and move on to the consent calendar.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Just one minor correction to the minutes. I apologize, there was a typo. In the last page, which the meeting was adjourned, should read 8:33 and not 8:03.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and motion to move the consent minutes
As amended, Commissioner.
as amended with the correction of the time.
Thank you.
And I'll second that. Okay, can we call the vote now, please?
Yes, Commissioner Peña,
Yes.
Commissioner Vasquez,
Yes.
Commissioner Escobosa,
Yes.
Commissioner Maciel Jr., Chair Valenzuela.
Yes.
Motion passes.
The motion passes 5-0. Now, can we go ahead and move on to item number 2? And at this moment, I'd like to open up public hearing.
Madam Chair, maybe before we do the public hearing, is there a presentation on this matter?
Yes, Mr. City Attorney, Madam Chair, I will be doing the presentation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
everyone had some coffee or give this presentation. I promise I will keep it as engaging as possible.
Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Mark. Are you going to go full screen or you're going to keep it in that?
Yes, I will keep it like this.
Okay, perfect. You can go to the next slide. Again, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission, and staff. Before you is a request for consideration of an amendment to update the City of Baldwin Park municipal code relating to new state law for accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, which is citywide, and this is city initiated. This report requests Planning Commission, again, consideration to recommend that the City Council approve an amendment to update the municipal code related to new state law established by Senate Bill SB 13, AB 68, and Assembly Bill 881 with respect to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. Next slide. I'll wait until you guys. Perfect. Please excuse my mask if it sounds like I mumbled. If you need me to repeat, please let me know. This code amendment before you for recommendation to the City Council is an amendment, again, to address the various state assembly and Senate bills passed in the last 2 years with respect to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. And just to give you a brief background on where we've been, where we're at and where we are now with respect to ADUs in the City of Baldwin Park. So in November of 2018, the City Council adopted an ordinance to amend the municipal code with respect to ADUs to address the state assembly bills, as I mentioned. And those years were in 2016 and 2017. So we've been dealing with this for a number of years now. It's definitely been an exercise for planners across the state of California in addressing the state's requirements for ADUs. So in that ordinance that the City Council adopted at that time prohibited ADUs for lots for 3 scenarios. And those include ADUs that would front substandard streets. The second one is lots located within 300 feet of a school bus stop. And the other is lots located on a street with permit parking. I want to introduce that. I'm going to come back to that because that's going to be really important as we move forward with our new ADU ordinance in the city. And again, over the years, ADU law has been revised to improve its effectiveness at creating more housing units, to further reduce barriers, to better streamline approval processes and expand capacity to accommodate the development of ADUs and junior accessory dwelling units, and us planners like to call them JDUs. So ADUs and JDUs. Next slide. So again, going back to those prohibitions, so prohibiting ADUs may only be based on state law. They indicated that cities cannot prohibit ADUs if they cannot make the following findings. Those are based on adequacy of water, sewer service, and impacts on traffic flow and public safety. Any limitations should be accompanied by detailed findings of the fact explaining why ADU limitations are required and consistent with these factors. And examples of public safeties include severe fire hazard areas and inadequate water and sewer service. So before I get into this, just a little more detail, for the past 6 months from the beginning of the year, staff and our city attorney have been working with the State Department of Community Development to craft an ordinance in compliance with state law. And one of the requirements in state law is that once adopted, we have to send it to HCD for their records to verify that the ADU ordinance is in compliance with state law. So what we did, because it was so voluminous in the requirements, what we did is we worked with HCD for those past 6 months to make sure that we had an ADU ordinance, that we knew we weren't going to get kicked back from the state. So we wanted to take advantage of that opportunity, implement it, and get that sign of approval. So the ordinance that has been attached in your staff report has been vetted through the State Department of Community Development and also our city attorney. So with that section on the prohibiting of the ADUs, the city can no longer prohibit ADUs based on those 3 items that the city had previously prohibited them. So we have to allow for the development of accessory dwelling units unless we can make those findings, which we cannot. So this ordinance is going to allow essentially ADUs throughout the city. And you're going to see throughout the presentation why ADUs are to be allowed per state law. So the first item is state law prohibits a local agency from establishing a maximum size of an ADU of less than 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet if the ADU contains more than 1 bedroom and requires approval of a statewide exemption ADU of up to 800 square feet, 16 feet in height, and 4 feet side yard and rear yard setback. So here, when we're looking at ADUs that come to the city, we look at what's state exempt. So it can't come through the planning division office for our review. It has to be submitted straight to the building division for plan check. If it's less than 800, if it's 800 square feet or less, and it's no higher than 16 feet in height, and provides 4-foot side yard and 4-foot rear yard. So we cannot apply the setbacks that we have in that zoning designation. For example, a 20-foot rear yard setback or a 10-foot side yard setback. It's an ADU. We have to allow for 4-foot side and rear. No ifs, ands. We have to allow it. The ADU also allows, prohibits the city from requiring any lot coverage or floor area ratio, open space, or minimum lot size that essentially precludes the construction of a statewide exemption ADU. So, to give you a perfect example, if you have a lot that is already at capacity, that it is at the brink of either at lot coverage or going to go over, we have to allow a state exempt accessory dwelling unit of 800 square feet. Next slide. I apologize. I'm sure this is better on your screens. This here is essentially a side-by-side of what the existing, the way that the existing code is set up as with respect to let me go, I'm sorry, I can't even read this because the way that the slide is. The existing gives you a breakdown, and at that time that met state law. And so it gives you an example of what the proposed state law does. Or we had a range of lot sizes, 5,000 square feet or less, and between 5,000 and 8,000, and above. And essentially you see there is 50% of living area of existing dwelling unit up to 60. No longer do that. Again, as I mentioned, have to allow 100 square foot ADU and nothing less 150. On that was the ordinance. Yes.
I have a quick question in regards to the setbacks that you provided right now. You said 4 feet.
Yes.
So we changed it from 5 to 4, or we're voting on that tonight.
That is correct, and that is state law. So for example, let's say you're a resident were to come in and do a single family house addition, they would be required to follow the requirements of that zone which could be more, which could be 5 feet or more. But the ADU, if it's an ADU, we have to allow for a 4-foot setback. So essentially the state reduced the setback for an ADU.
And if I may, Madam Chair? So Commissioners, what we're voting on tonight are all ADU related regulations. Everything that we're doing tonight is to make us consistent with state law. So while technically you have discretion because of course you're the voting body, in order to be compliant with state law, we will have to adopt all of the recommendations that are being made by Mr. Garcia.
Thank you for that, Mr. City Attorney. Next slide. So another thing that state law does is that it clarifies that when ADUs are created through the conversion of a garage or carport or covered parking structure, replacement of street parking spaces cannot be required by the local agency. So we cannot require parking, replacement parking. And to go further, conversion of an existing accessory structure or portion of the existing primary residence to an ADU is not subject to size requirements. So let me go over those scenarios. So the state law, so if you were to convert your garage or convert an accessory structure, we cannot require replacement parking. We have to allow for that conversion. The one unique thing about Baldwin Park is that it's and I'll go into a little detail, I'm going ahead of myself here, is that if you're within a half mile of a transit stop, you're not required replacement parking. So there are those cities that don't have a bus stop or transit stop within a half mile that doesn't require them to replace that parking. But because Baldwin Park is so unique, every property in Baldwin Park is within that half mile. And that's good because the state does promote the use of alternative modes of transportation. Now the size requirement. So if you were to convert, if the scenario is, let's say you had a 4,000 square foot house. It's quite big, but just so that way we can imagine a 4,000 square foot house and it's 2-story. State says you cannot limit the size. So you can convert 2,000 square foot of your second story into an ADU. There are no size limitations to that. That's for the conversion of an existing single-family home. There are no maximums there. So essentially, the larger the house, the larger the ADU, but it's just dependent on the need of the homeowner. The other thing that state law does is it reduces the maximum ADU and JDU application review time from 120 days to 60 days. So planning staff, were very cognizant of making sure that we meet those deadlines in accordance with state law. The other thing, as I mentioned, is we're getting to public transit. So it also clarifies that public transit includes various means of transportation that charge a set fee, run on a fixed route, and are available to the public. So city can require 1 parking space per ADU or per bedroom, whichever is less, except where property is. Again, here's where Baldwin Park is, except where parking is within half mile of a public transit. Any questions? Next slide. One thing that the state law does is it allows both an ADU and a JDU on a residential lot. The previous law only allowed for one. You can only have either one. You couldn't have both. But this one, you can now do an ADU and a JDU. And the junior accessory dwelling unit is only allowed in the single-family residential zoning area. And I'll go into a little more detail on the next topic here, is that it allows a permitted junior accessory dwelling unit to be constructed within the walls of the proposed or existing single-family residence, not to exceed 500 square feet. The junior accessory dwelling unit created in the attached garage are not subject to the same parking protection as ADUs. So as I mentioned, the ADU, you don't have to we can't require replacement parking. But for junior accessory dwelling units in this situation, for example, a homeowner comes in and says, I want to convert the garage to a junior accessory dwelling unit. But one thing, that, the new state law is that it's silent on it. So we can require replacement parking for a junior accessory dwelling unit within a garage. That's one area that we can request for replacement of parking. And again, the junior accessory dwelling unit cannot exceed 500 square feet of converted area of a single family home. You can have a single family home and you can convert 500 square feet of that single family home to a junior accessory dwelling unit. And then, as I mentioned previously, you can have an ADU as well. You can have a junior accessory dwelling unit that has converted space within the single family home and have a ADU, detached ADU. So that's a total of 3 rentable units on a single family residential property. Development impact fees. So ADUs less than 750 square feet are exempt from development impact fees. ADUs 750 square feet or larger may be charged impact fees and must be proportional to the square footage of the primary dwelling unit. So that's very clear there. Junior accessory dwelling units are limited to 1 per residential lot with a single family residence. And junior accessory dwelling units are not allowed in accessory structures. That's a one key thing there. Next slide.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So what are the developmental impact fees for the city of Baldwin Park?
So the development impact fees are, you have public safety development impact fees. You have flood control development impact fees. What are some other ones? Oh, we have traffic development impact fees. So those are the major ones that we have.
Great, thank you.
So with multifamily, this is where it gets really interesting. So we have to allow at least 1 ADU to be created within the non-livable space within multifamily dwelling structures. And those include, this is state law, that includes, but not limited to storage rooms, boiler rooms, passageways, attics, basements, and or garages. Have to allow those conversions of those areas into an ADU. And to go further, or up to 25% of the existing multifamily dwelling units within a structure may also allow not more than 2 ADUs on the lot detached from the multifamily dwelling unit structure. So new detached units are subject to height limits of 16 feet, shall not be required to have side or rear setbacks of more than 4 feet. So I'll give you an example. If you have 16 or 10 multi-family unit complex, and someone can evaluate what the storage rooms are, garages, and convert those, but it's up to 25%, no more, that can be used for converted space. Imagine what that could look like. Next slide.
I had a little question about this, if that's okay, Madam Chair. 25%, does that mean that it has to be detached, or you can do 25% of the actual home and just convert it into an ADU, even if it's not attached?
No, so it's 25% of the total units. I'm glad you brought that up. So it's 25, not to exceed 25% of the total units of the creation of ADUs of those spaces. So as long as it's not exceeding that.
But they still have to be detached.
No, this is attached. So if you have a multifamily structure that has like 10 units,
Yes.
and within those 10 units you have, let's say, a laundry room, or you have a maintenance room, those areas can be converted into ADUs.
I see, up to 25% of the total space.
Not to exceed, correct.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that the state law does is it eliminates all owner occupancy requirements by local agencies. ADUs approved between January 1st, 2020 and January 1st, 2025. That doesn't include JDUs. So the state law essentially allowed for this period of time that we cannot require. So the previous state law said that you can require owner occupancy. So either the owner had to live within the accessory dwelling unit or in the primary home. That was removed. We cannot require owner occupancy. That only lasts, that's going to sunset in 2025. I believe that when that time comes or before that, I'm sure that's the state is probably going to extend that out, possibly. Again, that doesn't include the junior accessory dwelling unit, so we can require owner occupancy for the junior accessory dwelling units. HOAs, they cannot reasonably prohibit ADUs or junior accessory dwelling units. Covenants, which are CCNRs, that either effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the construction or use of an ADU or JDU on a lot zoned for single-family residential use are void and unenforceable. We cannot, even a CCNR. So if you live in a HOA, you can do an ADU. You can convert the garage, and those CCNRs are null and void, and any future CCNRs. Here, it also allows local agency to count. This is a positive thing here, in that it allows local agency to count the ADUs and the junior accessory dwelling units as an adequate site to satisfy regional housing needs allocation. So we have a study session on the 27th. We'll go into that. We just released you, notify that the housing element has been released. And RENA is what is required by the state for each city to satisfy their housing capacity. So the number of units for the next 8-year cycle for Baldwin Park is a little over 2,000 units. So we can count those ADUs that have been approved towards that total number. Prefab and manufactured homes. So state law says yes, an ADU is any residential dwelling unit with independent facilities and permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitation. And that's per the Health and Safety Code. So prefab manufacturing homes count as or ADUs. Next slide. Just to give you some more further information, on September 1st of this year, the City Council held a study session, and a presentation was provided by LaSar Development Consultants, which provided a study on incentives for ADU production for affordability to help address the housing crisis. So the city back in 2018 received Measure H grant funds to perform these studies. And so what this study essentially did is it provided a list of opportunities for the city to take advantage if it were to want to promote the construction of ADUs for affordability and for families that are experiencing homelessness. And the items that were covered, again, I recommend that you, if you want to listen in on that meeting, is to go to the September 1st study session that started at 5 p.m. And to list some of the topics that were covered were financial subsidies, permit streamlining, project assistance, amnesty for unpermitted units, targeting low to moderate income homeowners, and also low income renters, and also households, as I indicated, experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And universally, it targeted toward a general increase in the supply of accessory dwelling units. And we're going to be embarking fairly soon. About a year ago, we received a $300,000 grant to assist the city, a grant from the State Department of Community Development, to assist us with the production of our housing element document, and also to further streamline our ADU reviews. And some of those things that we're going to be looking at to release an RFP is to assist us and staff, because you can imagine how time-consuming and how much time it takes to review the ADUs and process them accordingly, especially given that they reduced the time from 120 days to 60 days. So with that, we're going to be looking at pre-approved plans. And so that'll help streamline the process where they can select a number of prototypes without having to go out to an architect and spend thousands of dollars to do that. And on our end, it assists the city and moves the process along much quicker. And it helps the homeowner save costs at the same time. So we're going to be looking at that. And also community outreach, really getting the word out so that way the community understands what's available to them, explaining the process to them. And so we're going to be doing that in the coming year and releasing an RFP for that. We're really excited about that. And finally, with this code amendment and working with the State Department of HCD, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2112, which essentially is recommending that the City Council amend the city's municipal code relating to those new state laws for accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. I hope that this was an engaging, it was pretty dense, but I appreciate your time. I'm here to answer any questions of the commission.
Before I open up a public hearing, do the commissioners have any questions or concerns?
I have a question. I mean, Ron, when it comes down to the people doing the ADU, it's a rough figure of what they're looking at when they're the fees that they're looking at for, let's just say, a 150 square foot ADU.
I'm glad you asked that. I had that on the other slide, but from what I remember, you're looking at like $50,000 for between $25,000 and $50,000 on a garage conversion, and that includes permitting. It just depends on how expensive the fixtures and what types of fixtures. It can get expensive, and even for an 850 square foot to a maximum of a 1,200 square foot ADU, it could range between. Is it 150 to 250,000? Yeah, it's very expensive.
That's more than getting a whole new house put together.
Yeah, right. The last, materials is very expensive. Given COVID, we've been getting comments back from the development community with respect to how expensive lumber is. So that cost has definitely gone up. But it just depends on how expensive the homeowner wants to develop the ADU.
But as far as our fees, our permit fees, what are they looking at?
Our permit fees, they're not as much as it would are for the construction of the ADU. I think there's like several $1,000s in permit fees. They're also required to pay school fees with that, but it definitely not in the same range as what it costs to build the ADU. I will say in comparison to other cities, our fees are pretty much on par with that. And I think, as I mentioned, with the release of the RFP to develop pre-approved plans, I think that's going to help offset some costs for the residents.
The reason why I ask is because I know people are going to be asking, and just wanted to have knowledge of it to be able to say, hey, this is roughly what it's going to cost you. Because I know back in 2018, I think was when we brought this to the table, and we had to vote on this in order for us to put something into place so that we can have an ordinance. And with all of that, I just wanted to put that into perspective to see what it is that people are looking at when it comes to fees, because I'm sure with this, people are going to jump on board. And my next question will be is property values. With an ADU, do their property values go up? So that means property taxes go up?
Yes. To answer your first question, Vice Chair, what I can do after this meeting, I can give you that data on the average cost, and I apologize for not having that for you, but I can email that to you guys so you have an understanding of what the permit fees. I also want to let the commission know that we as staff, when we come in, we have data that we provide anyone that's interested in wanting to do an ADU, and it gives you examples of what the cost could be depending on the size or if it's like a garage conversion, and it gives them a rough estimate what those fees would be to help them understand what would be required as far as cost in permits. I can email that to you, what we give the community assistance,
Appreciate
because
that.
that question does get asked all the time.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I have a question, a couple questions. I apologize in advance. I'm trying to formulate several thoughts. Will we have access to these plans at any point? The pre-approved plans for the ADUs?
Yeah, so that's going to go through a planning exercise. So when we go through that, that's going to be a transparent process. The way I envision that process is that there's going to be some community outreach. There'll be some study sessions with the planning commission. At the end of the day, the commission and the city would have to adopt what is essentially presented and been reviewed by the community and also the stakeholders, the staff, the commission, and also the city council.
The next question is, you mentioned that there would be amnesty for homeowners who theoretically have already started building ADUs without going through the city. What is that going to look like?
Good question. I don't know what that's going to look like. That study essentially just highlighted policies that the council can further analyze and review as something to look at. An amnesty, the way, just on the surface, could be that allow for some streamlining process, some further assistance, and that could be a nonprofit organization. I am aware that LA County, in the LA County, there is a organization that has teamed up with LA County Regional Planning that helps people process accessory dwelling units, because not everybody's familiar with how to process or go through the red tape of government in the permitting process with building department, the planning division, the fire department. So that's what I envision for that to look like, is to just provide resources to do that.
Thank you.
Just a few more questions. So I guess just to get a background on this, so is this more just sort of a procedural vote? Because again, it is by state law that we do need to say, although I'm in favor of it, but technically we would still have to say yes. Is that right?
Yeah, so it is a procedural vote, if you will, because we are having to vote. But there is literally no discretion in terms of you being able to make changes to the recommendations, because then we would not be in compliance with state law. So it's something that we have to do as a planning commission. It's, for the most part, informational based for you, so you know what you're voting on and why we're voting on it. But yes, for the most part, procedural and pro forma, yes.
Great. Thank you. That makes sense. And then the second question I had, I think this is more sort of city planning staff. So assuming that this does pass, what do you anticipate just sort of the consequences, and I want to see consequences, I guess negative consequences for the city of Baldwin Park moving forward with this new amended ordinance, if any?
I think the first impact, as ADUs are developed over time, the number one thing I think the city is going to see, the residents, is parking. It's going to impact parking. I think that's one of the big things that I think the city is going to see. I think the state's logic for streamlining the process, and as I've presented, to make it much easier for the development of ADUs and JADUs, is to address the housing crisis and create affordability within the housing market. So the more units you put out there, the goal is that the cost of housing would come down. That's the nexus the state has mentioned. But again, this is going to take years for us to start seeing that effect. But I think the big one, if not already experiencing, is parking on residential streets.
Great. And then overall, would you agree that the benefits of this ordinance or this new proposed amended ordinance outweighs the consequences or the negative consequences?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I have a couple more questions. So the ADU numbers count towards the RENA requirement for the city, which helps the city meet a.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
So the ADU numbers count towards the city's requirement for RENA. Has there been any conversation about creating financial incentives for some of these homeowners on very large lots to build ADUs?
That's that was one of the topics that were highlighted in the study, and as we prepare to take this to the city council, there's some additional requests from the city council to provide some further information, especially with property tax. So that's still up in the air, be discussed as far as what that's going to look like in the future, what policies that the city would like to enact to allow for some incentives for that.
Thank you. And then one last question, I promise.
Oh, no. That's why I'm here.
What are some of the strategies being discussed to address the increased traffic flow that this is going to result in?
Well, there is going to be, you're obviously densifying neighborhoods by adding these accessory dwelling units and JADUs. But traffic, in our conversations with the state, quite frankly, they're saying, well, the state is promoting for residents to use alternative modes of transportation. They really kind of shut the door on us with respect to the argument of how it's going to affect those neighborhoods, especially, and we went through an exercise with the state on the uniqueness of the city with respect to the fact that they have we have a lot of substandard streets in the city. That's going to impact parking. Their immediate response was the state wants people to use public transportation. So I'll leave it there in that he didn't give us much wiggle room to do that. Now, even further, once we get past this ordinance, if the city were to endeavor on a traffic study, they're very costly. But in order to make those findings that I pointed in the presentation, those have to go to state HCD, and they have to approve that. And so we would have to do a comprehensive traffic analysis throughout the city to show if there are negative impacts to that. And that's just on the surface, not to get technical on what the traffic study would analyze. But at the end of the day, from our conversations from HCD, they have to be bulletproof. And I think the jury's still out on that one, if it is that the city got to a point. But I also want to add that in conversations with HCD, it's a 50-50. You can spend $300,000 on a traffic study to analyze traffic flow and the impacts of ADUs throughout the city. And there's no guarantee that the state would honor it. I hope that helps. I know it's definitely, I think the ADUs, as you notice, we've been going through this since 2016. And I think this is not the end. I think there's going to be further changes as we move along. I think it's just going to continue to evolve. There are a lot of cities that haven't, especially those cities that are near fire, especially on the hillsides, like Sierra Madre, Duarte, Covina, that have hillside fire hazard. Those are going to be the ones that can probably make that finding. But anything else, no, I'm not aware that any other cities have done that.
Oh,
I have one question. regarding the square footage that's being proposed and whatnot for the ADUs and JDUs. Is this going to be essentially the square footage that's also being proposed for any new homes that are being built in the
Oh,
city?
no, absolutely not. No.
Okay, just wanted to make sure on that because those are small space.
Yeah.
Okay,
When
that's
we
all. Thank you.
review those, that's where they have the flexibility is on the primary home. As long as they comply, they can go to 2-story or they can expand out. This ADU will be only strictly for accessory dwelling units.
Perfect. Thank you.
One last question.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So now that you refreshed my mind, it was back in 2016. The fact that we had already voted on making sure that there was parking space available, made available for those ADUs, that gets automatically thrown out just because the state says this is the new law?
Yes.
So
It makes, essentially, it makes ordinances null and void that are not, and so cities across California had to update their ADUs. We're just a little behind because of COVID, some staffing levels. But again, we wanted to make sure that we had an ordinance that wasn't going to get kicked back to us
right.
to another exercise. But essentially, yes, all those there were even those ordinances that were more restrictive, were null and void. We could not require it. We had to follow state law.
But we had voted on it prior to them putting out the law. So why did they get void and nulled if us voting on it was because we wanted to make sure that the parking wasn't going to be an issue and
Yeah, the state law indicated that any ordinances, any city adopted ordinances, that are not in compliant with the newly adopted state law were null and void.
And Vice Chair, the way to think about it is, the hierarchy where state law and city law, in areas where state is authorized to regulate, they can do what's called occupy the field. They can make laws that supersede ours. Just like the federal government could make a law that would supersede state law, right? And there's certain areas like the zoning, planning, and the different things like that, where the state is authorized to occupy that field, and that they would just automatically supersede ours. And so that it doesn't seem right, but because the state has different powers and certainly a lot more police powers than a city would, that's how this result ends up being. But it is true that once they do that, we have no discretion over that. And to the point of one of your other colleagues, before this time, you're exactly right. We could deny an ADU based on traffic impacts and based on traffic patterns and things of that nature. And what the state has now said is that you cannot take that into consideration. You cannot deny an ADU for that reason. So we're just kind of stuck with it.
Yeah. And to go even further, I wanted to make this point too before we do the amendment discussion. Is in the coming months, I'm going to be coming back to do a study session with the council and also with the planning commission. And I'm not sure if you've read the recent passage of SB 9. And essentially that eliminated single-family residential zoning across California. So that goes into effect January 1st, 2022. So what that means is it's allowing for no more single-family residential zoning. So all single-family residential zoning ends up turning into like fourplexes, and allows just on the surface, because staff and I we have a couple webinars that we're attending along with planners across California and also in the region to understand how we're going to address this new law that takes effect January 1st, 2022. Is it also allows the subdivision of a single-family parcel into 2 lots, and what that looks like. And from our reading of it so far, it just has to provide access. It's not. We're kind of thinking of it because currently our general plan prohibits flag lot subdivisions, where you have an L-shaped flag lot where you can subdivide 2 parcels. This one just allows a 40-60, so 60% of the lot can be subdivided with 40% remaining to 2 lots. And then those 2 lots, you can add accessory dwelling unit, a JADU, and essentially allow for up to 4 units on each of the properties. So on top of this ADU, the governor just passed SB 9. There are several cities, there are a handful of cities that had got rid of single-family residential zoning, one being in Sacramento was studying it. City of Berkeley, they passed eliminating single-family residential zoning. There are some other states in the Midwest that also adopted those standards. But that's going to have a big impact on the city. So I'm going to be presenting a presentation to the council so that way they're aware what this impact is going to be to the city. So we'll be coming back on that. And that goes to what your question you had asked. State passed this law, we have to comply with it.
No, I totally understand. It's just
Yeah.
what I don't understand is why would they supersede on something we've already established and voted on as an ordinance prior to it made actual state law. We did that before, so that's where I have the problem. Where there was a restriction as far as the parking and also the lot size. When they first came in, they said, I believe it was 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And most of the homes here don't even come close to that. And I know we voted on making ours 5,000.
Yeah.
So we made it so that it was adequate enough for our residents, but with the requirements that we put in then to make sure that there was parking and that outside parking wouldn't be an issue for the residents, because that's the first thing that's going to happen now as soon as this gets put through.
I hear you.
Is there a way to make a limitation as to how? No, never mind.
That was the other thing with SB 9 with the subdivision of single-family lots. We can't require parking on those too.
Yeah, and some background on that, Vice Chairman, is that that's exactly the reason the state made this law, because they believe cities were making it too restrictive to have ADUs. And they said, oh no. Many cities made it so restrictive to have an ADU that you couldn't have one at all, right? Because cities just didn't want them, especially some of the affluent cities and the foothill cities and things like that. So the state adopted this law specifically for that reason, to get rid of all the restrictive city laws. So not only did they do it, they did that for that exact reason. Yeah.
I want to emphasize too that when we were having those lengthy discussions, we did go through lengthy discussions with the state. And when we looked at those 3 prohibitions in our ADU ordinance, the one that we thought could stick and we can make the argument, it just didn't happen, which was substandard streets. Mm-hmm. And their argument back to us was, well, are you prohibiting the development of single-family homes on those properties? And the answer is no, cannot. So you cannot prohibit the development of ADUs. So that argument didn't stick.
Yeah.
I have a quick comment in regards to that. I know SB 9 pretty much essentially eliminates all single housing zoning throughout the state, right?
Correct.
Although it's eliminated, does the city still have to do it? It's my point. Like, I don't want to say that you don't have to follow the law, because you do, right? But as long as people are still applying only for single family homes, they can still be built that way, correct? Okay, I just wanted to verify that. All right, any other comments, concerns, regards? Okay. All righty, so then I will now open the public hearing for item number 2. Any in favor of the item? Any opposed or against? I see none, seeing no speakers, I will now close the public hearing. Now I can go ahead and open it for open discussion if you guys have any other comments or concerns. No? Okay, I see none. Then I'll go ahead and move forward to the vote. And a motion as well, please.
Before we move it forward, Council, is there any suggestions you can give as far as what can be done in a situation like this where I'm leaning more towards no on this only because of the parking that's going to be an issue on this. I'm thinking forward, future-wise, this is going to be an issue for us, and why not nip it in the butt now before it becomes that issue?
Well, the only thing that you could do, of course, is you could vote no, and then we would have to challenge state law in court, in litigation. So we'd have to go after the state on something like this, which would be extraordinarily expensive. So while you have that limited option, you truly don't have an option.
Much of a say.
Yeah, because otherwise, you're buying yourself a lawsuit is what you're doing. Yep.
May I add? So I guess in this matter would be that we'd have to reach back out to our state elected officials to revisit this law.
Yes, of course, that's always an option, right? Lobbying and to be able to speak with, our senator, our assembly member, other members of the state legislature. But seeing as though this has already passed the state, that's why we have this. Those discussions probably have already occurred, and they probably have negotiated and compromised, and this is what they ended up with. But of course, that's still an option at any point to do that.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll now go ahead and move on for a motion. I'll go ahead and motion it.
I'll second.
Can we do vote, please?
Yes, well, that was a second, Commissioner Escobosa.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Peña,
Yes.
Commissioner Vasquez,
Yes.
Commissioner Escobosa,
Yes.
Vice Chair Maciel Jr.,
Yes.
Chair Valenzuela.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Now I'll go ahead and like to go for the report of officers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I just want to remind the commission that we have a joint Planning Commission City Council meeting on October 27th to present the draft housing element prior to sending that document to the State Department of Community Development for their review, and also presentation on the downtown specific plan modifications per council direction. That'll be October 27th. I'll send out another reminder. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to staff.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any other communications? And now I'd like to open it for communications for the commission.
Madam Chair, I have a question for Ron. On our last planning committee, I requested for any updates of any projects that are being done out there.
Sincerely apologize. Melissa can attest to it. Did you bring them? Oh, okay. You know what I'll do? In addition to sending out that information on the accessory dwelling units, I'm going to go ahead and email you the list of the project status report. I sincerely apologize. I totally just got sidetracked with some other things. But I apologize. I will send that out to you.
I understand. Also, I kind of was searching around the website, the city website. Is there somewhere in the website where the community could go and see what's the progress of the specific project? At least I wasn't able to find it. Is there?
No, we don't. I'm aware that some cities have a framework on their webpage where they can go in. It's good. It's really fancy. I've seen some like City of LA, LA County, and I've seen some other larger municipalities that have that. Our website does not have that capability. So the one thing we can do is we rely on if people have questions regarding a status of a project, or if they see construction happening, they call into City Hall and they ask what's taking place there, and then we can provide the project status report to you after tonight's meeting.
Yeah.
and to add to that, definitely I will put that down as a need as funds become available. If we do have a comprehensive update to our website, that be included as a feature.
Is it? Yeah, thank you. And is it possible that maybe that's something that could be brought up to the council and maybe suggest something sooner than that, if possible, so we kind of start letting our community know what's happening out there, what projects are so.
Yeah, I can report back. I can have a conversation with our IT and see if there's any funds that are allocated for that in the future. I can report back. I have not had that specific conversation with IT.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other communications from the staff or commission? No? Okay. If there are no further comments by the commission, I will accept a motion for adjournment.
I'll second it. Oh, I'll motion to adjourn.
Perfect.
Good night, everybody.
I'll second.
Jen, conclude. All right. Commissioner Peña,
Yes.
Commissioner Vasquez,
Yes.
Commissioner Escobosa,
Yes.
Vice Chair Maciel Jr.,
Yes.
Madam Chair Valenzuela.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.